With you. Good morning, everybody. This is Tim O'Brien. I am the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion. I am joined today by two of my esteemed, smart, and wily colleagues, Nia Malika Henderson and Frank Wilkinson. They are both political columnists. And as you can guess, we have a special edition of the Bloomberg Opinion 2024 election live stream because last night, as you may have heard, there was a debate. And the debate involved the first presidential standoff between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Spoiler alert, she won handily. But what we're going to get into, I think, in our discussion today are some of the components of that. Harris started off a little rocky. It didn't last very long. And once she got her footing, she took Trump basically, I think, in the directions her campaign wanted her to, in the directions she wanted to, in the directions that played to her strengths and his multifaceted oddities. And there's a short time between now and the election, so she comported herself well. To me, Nia and Frank, the core strategic anchor in the entire debate was Kamala Harris putting different pieces of bait out in front of Trump, and him not only taking the bait, but acting on the bait in almost a dream scenario for anyone who is his opponent. I want to set up a clip of one of the early moments in the debate when she talked to Trump about his rallies.
You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say.
So that was presidential leadership in action there. Trump's opponent said to him, people aren't attending your rallies. As we know, Trump prides himself on his rallies. And Trump said, no, people come to rallies. And by the way, there are immigrants eating dogs and cats. Nia, you can talk about that moment and then talk a little bit more about Harris laying the bait.
Yeah, listen, her entire approach through this 90-minute debate was to go on offense. And you saw that early on. She comes out of the gate. She immediately goes over and shakes Donald Trump's hand, says, I'm Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate. She controls the tempo of this debate from that moment on. She started off what some say is a little rocky. I thought it was sort of in the weeds. It was a sort of policy discourse about what she could do, because there's all this criticism that she doesn't have enough policy details. So she started off there, but then she immediately lays the bait on in any number of ways. One, of course, was the crowd. Another way she did it was with Wharton. Right? He sort of wears his Wharton degree as sort of a badge of smartness and a badge of expertise in the business world. And so she comes out and says, listen, the smart folks you like to tout and associate with at Wharton Business School think your economic plan is crap, right? That's what she said. And there so that was sort of the beginning of it. And all through the debate, that's what she did. Listen, I came into this debate thinking she would win the debate. Maybe she'd get like a B, she'd be fine. The stakes were incredibly high. I sort of didn't think she would meet them. She surpassed my expectations. And partly it was because she kept Trump on the defense, so he wasn't able to make any sort of coherent argument against her. And there are arguments to be made, right? You've been there 3 years. Why haven't you done all these plans that you're laying out now? got into that a little bit at the end there, but he just lost it, right? I mean, the dog comment, I think it was actually cats, but he said dogs for some reason. I mean, this is a silly rumor that's been in the chattering class of crazy conservatives, and that's what you saw come to life.
His running mate corrected him and said, "No, not dogs and cats, geese."
Yes.
So,
And you saw that version of Trump come to life on the debate stage. And to the extent that centrist voters, Republican voters have soured on Donald Trump, it's because of what you saw last night, right? They wanted open mics initially so he could be his crazy self. It turns out they didn't need open mics, right? He was just himself. He showed up fully as Trump. And Kamala Harris led him through the entire debate, dominating this masculine strongman, right? That's what he's running as. And in the end, he got his ass handed to him by a girl, essentially. And that's what you saw. I mean, it was a really humiliating experience, I think, for Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, more than most people, no one likes to be humiliated, but Donald Trump has a very low threshold for humiliation. His psyche is always in play in public events. He's this magic mixture of both a narcissist and a very deeply insecure person, whose comfort zone really is performance art. And when you get beyond performance art and into the nuts and bolts of declarative sentences and logical thinking, he ends up like King Lear howling at the moon. And I think, Frank, for me as a viewer watching Trump on the split screen, it was interesting to me that someone who is such a student of celebrity, it may be the only thing he's a student of, and having come out of the Biden debate where there was a split screen there that worked very poorly to Biden's interest because he looked horrible on the split screen. He looked lost and wandering, and Trump looked relatively reserved. Last night, the split screen showed a amused, calm, put together Kamala Harris watching a glowering Trump on the other side of the split screen, who frequently looked angry and unhinged. What did you think as a theater goer watching this last night?
Well, I guess my first point about that is that it was performance art, right? Use that phrase, and it's not a debate. You cannot have a debate with Donald Trump. So the first premise of preparing for a debate with Donald Trump is to recognize that no such thing is possible. Donald Trump is a fire hose of lies, first of all. And on top of that, they're disconnected lies. So you can't thread them together. You can't rebut them. You can't really have what, I mean, look at the model of debate, right? Kennedy and Nixon in 1960. There's no comparison. This is nothing like that, right? There's no comparison. These are not people discussing issues. They're not having disagreements about foreign policy or healthcare. There is nothing like that. It's just a fire hose of lies. And so Harris has to go in deciding how to deal with that. And the way to deal with that is performance, right? So, if you were to, I think, summarize what Nia was just saying, it's Harris exploited Trump's pathologies to show him as pathological. I mean, really, that's kind of the reduction of what she was trying to do. Why was she bringing up crowd size? Because they matter? No, because, they matter only to Donald Trump. And because Donald Trump is so deeply insecure and damaged, and she wanted to bring that out. And of course, as you both have said, he very predictably went for the bait.
So while Donald Trump reveals himself as he's been revealing himself over the last decade, I think it's gotten worse if things can go from bad to worse. In his case, they have. I think in part because he's aging. I think physically he's diminished. His hearing isn't what it used to be. He's mush-mouthed when he speaks. His mind, which was never particularly sharp, is even less acute, et cetera, et cetera. And in the same vein, we've seen Kamala Harris since her anointment as Biden's successor, really come into her own, I think, and continue to come into her own. And you've been watching her for a long time, throughout her career, and talk a little bit about what you've seen around her evolution.
Yeah. Listen, I've known Kamala Harris, first met her when she was AG in California and spent some time with her, interviewing her, covered her in 2019 as well. And listen, fairly or unfairly, the general public kind of sees her as this 2019 failed candidate, right? She came out with a bunch of money, a lot of excitement, a lot of support, and then sort of flamed out. But one of the moments that stood out in that campaign was that debate moment she had with Joe Biden, right? Where she talks about his working with segregationists, and she was the little girl that was bused to one of these integrated schools in California. And that's kind of the Kamala Harris that people in California know, right? That she is able to break through, that she's come up through this very rough and tumble California political world that birthed Ronald Reagan, that birthed Nancy Pelosi, and she's very skilled politically. A bunch of columnists over the last couple of months had meetings with her. And what was clear to a lot of those columnists who were there was that she sort of understood the campaign in a way that the Biden team didn't, right? She thought that the Biden team was leaving a lot on the table in terms of the kind of voters she could reach and that she was talking to, going to HBCUs, going to the sorority parties that Donald Trump derided last night. So she understood and was getting reps in with those audience, hearing from those audiences. And of course, there was the moment immediately post Dobbs, right? She gets out there and she frames it for Democrats, this idea of freedom, right? And you hear that echoing through her campaign now, you know, most notably with the song, the Beyonce song. And so it all comes together for her. The ingredients always there, sort of birthed in the cauldron of California politics. But then at every moment, she rises to the occasion to what had been a very skeptical audience, right? The audience of the press, the audience of just average American voters. And it's been sort of amazing to see her blossom in this way, and for kind of average voters, the press, discover the Kamala Harris that folks in California have seen for a while, right? She was dubbed the female Obama by the late and great reporter we all miss, Gwen Ifill, because she did have this presence and this charisma that Trump himself noticed, right? He donates to her campaign because he sees her promise as well. And you saw last night that all of the sort of hype that she had going in, the hype that she's had for really years as this candidate and this possible president, you saw that on stage last night all come together at the right moment.
Yeah, Trump probably wants his $5 back from the Harris campaign. You know, Frank, the fire hose of lies image is a terrific one, and it doesn't get fully at the kinds of things he says. In addition to people, you know, undocumented immigrants munching on dogs and cats in Ohio. At one point, he also said undocumented immigrants in jails were getting transgender operations. He goes to places that are lies plus crazy, and it makes it difficult to get into sort of substantial views on the debate and substantial topics of policy, because he continuously undermines them with ridiculousness. But I do think one of the signature moments around policy was the abortion discussion. And I want to set up a clip that we can use as a departure point for that.
I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D., and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job. He said, the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
So Frank, let's talk about that piece of it. And then Nia, I want to tilt towards the discussion as well of the Roe decision and what Harris and Trump talked about what the states are doing with reproductive rights and what the federal government is and isn't doing. But Frank, on that first point about abortions in the 3rd trimester and the 8th and 9th month, Harris correctly pointed out that that is not legal or acted upon in any state.
Well, Trump has been trying for some months now to find a space on abortion, and he hasn't found it yet. He thinks the best he's got so far is, we turned it back to the states, right? That's his argument. Everybody's free. Everybody wanted it back to the states, which is, of course, another lie. And now the states, everybody's free to do what they want. So everybody gets what they want in abortion policy because it's in their own state. It's not an argument that really he's gained any ground on. There are too many stories of women with, horrible miscarriages, bleeding, as Harris pointed out, bleeding out in a car in the parking lot. And I think there was something, in addition to the sort of typical lies that Trump spouts on abortion, there's a different abortion argument now, and Harris is making it. It was all about compassion. Her argument wasn't, women have to have this right, women deserve this right. That was secondary to, we have to have compassion for women who need to make this decision on their own. And it was, it's a subtle change, but I think it's a very significant one. It moves the argument away from, compassion for the unborn, which is where the anti-abortion movement long invested a lot of emotional energy, and moves it to compassion for the woman. And I think it was a very successful, subtle shift for her. And the contrast with Trump just really just flailing with more lies about, babies being executed after birth, I think was very successful for her, obviously.
Yeah, I think probably on multiple fronts, Trump's handlers were pulling their hair out because he never listens to advisors anyway. And he must have certainly gone off script on a number of things, including abortion. But there was another moment where he talked about the virtues of returning abortion rights decisions to the states. And Harris quickly jumped in to note that if she's elected, she would federalize this issue once again, so women have access to reproductive rights, and that Trump would sign a ban if he were a national abortion ban if he was president. He denied that, but I don't think that issue went well for him either. And I think Harris came across again as rational and responsive to voters.
Yeah, listen, they have centered the words and stories of women who are dealing with this very fraught decision about whether or not to get an abortion, their health issues. Obviously, she talked specifically about what might have been actual cases of women who were bleeding out in the parking lot because the doctor didn't know whether or not they'd be criminally liable if they gave the woman an abortion. And she also mentioned the woman didn't want that, nor did the woman's husband want that, right? They've been very good also about making this a family issue with men included. And so it probably was the most powerful section on abortion that we've ever had in a debate and in a public space watched by millions and millions of viewers. And it really was, I think, a follow-up of what we saw at the DNC, right? These women who came forward, talked about their experiences, most notably a young woman in Kentucky who'd been molested. And in this new version that Trump seems fine with, this new version of states' rights, that young girl probably wouldn't have been able to get an abortion. She might have had to travel somewhere to get an abortion when she was very young. And so that was powerful. Trump has no answer for it. The other thing that Trump is dealing with, he knows this is a terrible issue for Republicans. So you can see him trying to find a new path forward on this. At some point, he said he's a leader on fertility, for instance. There was a time before this debate where he seemed to waffle on whether or not he supported this referendum in Florida around expanding access to abortion. I was talking to a pollster about this, and she's been tracking these evangelical voters and had been tracking them the moment that Donald Trump seemed to waffle on abortion rights and maybe seemed to back this Florida expansion of abortion rights. She said she saw the numbers around evangelicals dip almost like within 15 or 20 minutes of him seeming to waffle on this pro-life stance that evangelicals have come to expect from him. So that is what he is dealing with. He knows it, and that's why he waffled again on the national abortion ban, right? He didn't say he would support it. He didn't say he would reject it. He just said, oh, it's a hypothetical. Well, guess what? Everything involved in presidential politics when you're running for president is a hypothetical. If I become president, this is what I will do. And so he's stuck, and this is where I think Kamala Harris and Democrats have really found their footing, found a framing for it, this idea of freedom. These people want to control your body in this way. What else will these radical, extreme Republicans do?
I want to remind everyone watching, we are indeed live, and we can take your questions live. Our amazing producer, Mary Newman, will pick some of the best ones and put them in front of us, and we will get to them if we can. We have a question from an Instagram user who asks, Frank, how significant are body language and charisma in television debates when compared to the articulation of ideas and policies?
Well, if you ask Kamala Harris, I think she would say very important. That's why she marched across that stage at the very initial moment of the debate and into Donald Trump's territory to shake his hand in a very sort of forthright, almost aggressive way. Mm-hmm. She wanted to command the space. She wanted to show that she was able to go on offense against him, which she then did for the rest of the debate. It was a very, very clear body language signal. I think that all of her reactions, you talked, Tim, about the split screen, obviously very important. I don't think her facial grimaces and smiles and laughs and the disdain that she communicated through her face, I don't think any of that was accidental. It was entirely intentional. She wanted to show that she found his remarks ridiculous and really beneath contempt. You know, she performed as much as Trump is a performer. She was a performer last night. They were both performing. He performed badly because he lost control of himself, and she performed quite well. And I suspect, you know, look, every politician's an actor, right? Every politician who's a good politician is a performer of some sort. We know that. And so she showed, as Nia was saying earlier, she rose to the occasion. She's been rising to the occasion. And this is what very good politicians do. When they reach a higher level, they rise to it. They show they have the chops to compete at that level. And that's what we've been seeing from her for the last couple of months, and certainly what we saw last night.
Yeah. You know, the moment she goes over and shakes his hand really was sort of a callback to a debate that Hillary Clinton had with Donald Trump, right? Where he is looming over her as she talks, right? He is the big, strong man. She is the smaller woman. And we know that Donald Trump really wanted to be the big, strong man in this debate, right? He had said something about, oh, she shouldn't be able to stand on a box. She should be as, you know, short as she really is. And I want to be the, you know, sort of the Hulk Hogan figure in this debate, as he was in the Hillary Clinton debate. She marches right over to him, cuts him down to size, and just keeps chopping away through the entire debate. I mean, it was like, I mean, you guys are sports guys. It was like she had the hot hand. It was like she was like Curry, like in the last 2 minutes of that France, USA gold medal match, and she was just killing him. I mean,
running around just making three-pointers.
My only sort of response was, wow. Like, and at times I almost felt sorry for him. It was almost like throw in the towel here, because she is just pummeling him, and he has no response for it.
A lot of observations were made about this debate, that it was the first debate between a vice president and a former president, and the first of this, the first of that. It's also the first time a convicted felon was on the presidential debate stage. And I want to cut to a clip of Trump talking about law enforcement being, quote unquote, weaponized against him.
Please. This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation
we do have a lot
that went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
President Trump, we have a lot to get to. Please try making sense so we can get to it. Boy, that statement had quite a bit to unpack, because he's blaming, as he did throughout the debate, other people for the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, which he fomented. He's blaming his political opponents for the fact that he got shot at in Pennsylvania when he and his party have presided over a wildly irresponsible embrace of guns at the expense of public safety and lives. And he's characterizing an array of existentially threatening lawsuits around electoral fraud and trafficking in classified documents, et cetera, as somehow being the handiwork of Kamala Harris, again, as opposed to simply being the result of his own malfeasance and irresponsibility. Frank, I don't think it surprises either of us that he went there. What continues to captivate me is his inability to adequately defend himself in a public forum anymore. He used to be better at this.
I'm going to take the opposite side of that. And that is, take a step back and look at our political situation. He is a man who literally attempted to overthrow the republic by renouncing an election. He is a convicted felon on 34 counts. Basically, the reason he's not convicted on other counts in other courtrooms is because he's been very successful in delaying those trials. Our politics is in a bad way that someone that damaged and damaging is on that stage last night. So on the one hand, yes, Harris did a great job and Trump did a bad job. It was a success for her and not a good night for him. We'll see, what the impact of that is, because after all, we've got a highly polarized country and there's only so much you're going to move a certain number of people to your camp on something like that. But the reality is, a man whose half of his cabinet says is totally unfit for office was on that stage last night, and he's running pretty much 50-50 for president. So all these other things aside, we are in a kind of psychotic moment in American politics that we're even talking about this.
And psychotic and shambolic. I don't think Donald Trump's a conservative. I think he's an anarchist. And at one point, Nia, Harris asked him about healthcare plans and where he was on the front lines of what we ask of most candidates is, what do you want to do with the power you have? And he talked about this. We'll cut to a little clip right here.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Yeah, Well, it's you know, those are the things you get to say when you live in an alternative reality bubble. Um, uh, Concepts of a plan. Um, Unpack that one for me.
Yeah, they don't have a plan. I mean, he's full of it. He's been talking about some great plan that'll be cheap and give you everything you want. Apparently, it's going to include free IVF, either paid for by your insurance company or the federal government. But this is, this is part of his shtick. This is part of his kabuki theater, right? Oh, it's going to come. It's going to come. He's like, stand by. Coming soon, a plan from Donald Trump, and nothing ever materializes. Listen, I am sure his advisors were very, very disappointed in what they saw last night. I'm not sure who prepped him. I don't know if it was Tulsi Gabbard or Matt Gaetz or who, but he didn't really land any blows against Kamala Harris. I thought, for instance, maybe he would talk about her record as AG and maybe try to make more inroads with those working class men who have issues with her prosecutorial record. That was totally absent. This idea that she's been there all this time and hasn't done the plan she has now, that's a pretty good argument to make. But she kept him so on his back foot, so on the defense, and so just hunting for rabbits everywhere that he just lost it and didn't have any sustained argument against her. Her people have come out and said, listen, it was fun. Let's have another debate. He has said, I guess he's got to think about it. He won this debate. He has said, so why do another one? It'll be interesting to see if there'll be another one. The other interesting line I think she got off a couple of times was, I'm not Joe Biden. I'm Kamala Harris, right? I'm not Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I'm Kamala Harris, because he, again, lives in this sort of fantasy land where he is running against Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris's point is a new way forward gets this country beyond the era of old white men. And that is exactly who Donald Trump was last night, an old and kind of addled and out of it, mediocre, less than mediocre man who was really dog walked, to use a phrase the kids like to use, by Kamala Harris. And I'm sure, I think this is the beginning of an additional spiral for him, right? If you look at his, appearances and his rallies and his interviews, he's out of it. And I think his anger and his sense that he was humiliated in front of millions of people, that is not going to go over well in these coming weeks. And I think we're going to see the results of that in his appearances going forward.
Well, and he knew it almost instantaneously. When was the last time a president went into the spin room? Not a presidential contender went into the spin room immediately after a debate in the general election. It hasn't happened before, and he has done it in the primaries. But I think he read the room correctly, and he was panicked. He did not stick points on the economy. Could be a winning issue for him in the debate. Swing state voters, put that at the top of their list. He didn't get there. He didn't do it on immigration, and he was befuddled on foreign policy and national security. I don't think voters care as much about that as we policy wonks and internationalists do, or in I think Stephen Miller's characterization, we cosmopolitan globalists. But this did pop up in the debate. I want to go to a clip where NATO is brought into the forum.
Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch?
I think this is another one of those Kamala Harris coming into her own moments in this debate, Frank. She addressed China, she addressed Gaza, she addressed Ukraine. These are all three perilous theaters. Two of them are active theaters of war. One of them, China, if China were to attack Taiwan, would become a hot zone as well. And I think she asserted the indispensable role the U.S. plays globally in moments like this, and in a way that Trump avoided throughout the debate and has avoided as a politician. And I think, to me, it accrued again to her as a strong, purposeful leader who was looking after national security and American interests.
I think there were several points in that clip that are really worth belaboring. One is that she was at least twice turning to him and lecturing him.
Yeah.
She was, cutting him down, as Nia said. She was belittling him. She was lecturing him like he was a student and she was a professor. The other is she didn't talk about Trump's admiration for dictators. She didn't talk about his wanting to be a dictator. She talked about his frailty, his weakness, how easily he would be manipulated by Putin. She made him a weak man, which you, of course, know he is, Tim. And I would really like to hear your little psychological evaluation of the night, because you know him so well. But she really, really schooled him in a very public way that was intended to make him small, she used the word weakness when she talked about him another time. She made him small, weak, frail, and subservient to this goon in Russia. And I think especially that last line about Poland, just, such a great way to end that, pointing out that there are 800,000, people of Polish descent in Pennsylvania. And, that just delivered the hit on every level.
In terms of putting the context of Trump's psyche, one of the aspects of his presence in our national dialogue is that essentially it's always a therapy session when he's doing a press conference or he's at a debate or he's giving a speech. He invites the American public into these very histrionic therapy sessions in which he asks people to acknowledge that he's smarter than everyone, that he's better looking than everyone, that he's more macho than everyone, that he's got more athletic achievements, that he doesn't need advice from other people because he's a military tactician and a brain surgeon and a cardiologist and a geologist and a scientist, and in his spare time paints impressionistic art, and wants us to constantly affirm that. And when people don't, he goes on the attack, and he goes on the attack around odd things. He doesn't go on the attack if necessarily someone calls him a liar, but if they say he's incompetent, he gets discombobulated. And Harris really did get perfectly under his skin on issues like that. I think another thing that has played out over a couple of years now is Donald Trump is getting taken to the woodshed by women of color in multiple forums, in the state of Georgia, in the state of New York, and in the federal district courts in Washington, D.C., and now in this presidential campaign. Women of color who are either public prosecutors, judges, or formidable political candidates are taking baby Huey to task in a way that for him has to be completely unspooling, because he thinks lesser of women. He thinks lesser of people of color. He thinks lesser of almost everyone else around him, but specifically of those categories of our fellow human beings. And now, I think he's running for the presidency in no small part to avoid going to jail. And so he's dealing with a candidate here right now who's running circles around him. And she's a diminutive woman of color who stands and looms very large in his psyche, I think. Nia, as my friend, I can't say fellow woman of color because I'm not, but as my friend and a woman of color, how do you read that? This, I guess I would call it a comeuppance.
Yeah, listen, and you're right. I mean, to point out the litany of African American women who are handing him that comeuppance in very public ways, and you talk about sort of the unspooling of his psyche being on the other end of that. I wonder about the unspooling of the psyche of his hanger-ons, right? The followers who sort of attain a kind of masculinity
Mm.
through their association with him, right? Like the bikers for Trump. Did they see that debate and what did they think about it? You know, to the extent that working class men, black men, and Latino have a sort of machismo about them, and what one might call a kind of toxic masculinity. Trump has promised, right, that he is the strong man, that this is a dumb woman who is a DEI candidate, and yet she gets on the stage and utterly dominates him, right? She tops him in the lingo of a different community. And I just wonder if you are a sort of working class man who is invested in Trump's masculinity, because he sort of affirms the kind of masculinity you aspire to. What did you think last night? He did not seem strong. He seemed very weak. He was easily baited. She said to him, world leaders laugh at you, right? Which is his nightmare, right? And you could see him sort of shrink. You could see him sort of devolve into smallness with his eyes and with his facial expression. And so I wonder about that, since masculinity, and Frank, you've written brilliantly about this, since masculinity itself is a kind of theme and character in this, in obviously culturally, but specifically within the context of this presidential race, he sort of failed on that metric that he set for himself around this kind of Hulk Hogan masculinity.
Thank you for setting Frank up for that one, yeah, because it also comports. Frank has written gloriously about faux masculinity and projections of masculinity within the GOP and around Trump. And one of our TikTok users, Frank, asked the question, what do you think about the fact that Trump wouldn't look at Harris at all during the debate? It looked like beta behavior to me. Do you agree with that? Do you think that was intentional on Trump's part?
I would defer that to you, but to me, it goes right back to what you were saying, which is that he was unnerved. He assumes that he's going to dominate a woman and a black woman at that. He assumes that he's going to be the gorilla on stage, and she just completely unnerved him. And to go to Nia's point, emasculated him a bit as well. I mean, given that is his measure of who he is and what he represents, he did not represent that last night. He was shriveled, he was weak, and she was dominating the stage, even though he, by the way, spoke, I think, about 6 minutes more than she did. He kept insisting on more time. And so he dominated the amount of time. She dominated the space, though. And she dominated the physical space. She physically dominated him.
Looking forward, Nia, another one of our audience members on Instagram said, what do you think will happen in the VP debate? Will Walz conquer Vance with facts and charisma? Obviously, JD Vance has embraced in also in a number of extremely bonkers ways his own notions of masculinity and femininity.
Right.
What are you looking for in that debate?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Waltz has become this real cultural figure that has all of these touchstones, right? He was an assistant coach. He was a school teacher. His wife's a school teacher. Everybody can sort of relate to that. He speaks very plainly. He's the guy that'll help you move into your apartment and then help you clean your gutters. That's how he's sort of come across to average Americans. Vance is something totally different and sort of this created person that seems to at times have trouble ordering donuts in a normal way. That has kind of become a meme around him. It sort of reminds me. It has the potential, I think, to be the Joe Biden Paul Ryan debate, where Joe Biden just sort of dismisses him as son through the whole thing and is like, you're full of malarkey. I think that'll probably be the kind of vibe you get. JD Vance
Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, just to
yeah,
unearth some
exactly,
ancient history
exactly.
there as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And JD Vance is one of the most unlikable VP nominees that we've seen. We saw Taylor Swift come out, right, in a pretty lengthy Instagram post and support Kamala Harris, and she signs it as childless cat lady because she is a cat lady who has some of the most beautiful cats I've ever seen in my life. One of whom's names is, I think, Benjamin Buttons. There you go. I've never seen a more extraordinary cat. But yeah, she is engaging with JD Vance, who people think is weird, right? And so I think you're going to have sort of weird JD Vance and kind of normal, likable Tim Walz. And so I think we'll probably be talking about this after it's over in a similar way that we're talking about this debate with Kamala Harris.
When that famous childless cat lady entered the public debate last night with her Instagram post, she also had a link in it to voter.org. And it is a measure, I think, not only of Vance's wildly bad judgment and the kind of dismissiveness and condescension he has demonstrated towards women, but she's corralling that sentiment and then giving people a place to take action, whether it's putting funds into the race or registering to vote. And there's going to be clips from last night's debate that I think are going to be plastered across swing states now. There will undoubtedly be some clips from the vice presidential debate that may serve the same purpose. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So I'm going to have to ask you two to come back again after the next epic moment in this epic election. Nia Malika Henderson, a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion, Frank Wilkinson, a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion. Thank you both for joining us. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and we will be back next Tuesday with another installment of Bloomberg Opinion's 2024 election live stream. Thank you all.